So a lot of these features are new features that probably weren't there when you first made your package, but I'd like to just briefly talk through what each of these are and talk about how to fix them. So before jumping into the complexity of those red X's, let's just take a little step back and talk about how to edit what appears in a NuGet package, because it might be a little bit confusing for someone who's brand new.
Welcome, friends, to the Modern .NET Show, the premier .NET podcast focusing entirely on the knowledge, tools, and frameworks that all .NET developers should have in their toolbox. We are the go-to podcast for .NET developers worldwide, and I am not your host, Jamie. I'm Delilah, and I will be recording the intro for this episode because Jamie is suffering with a throat infection. In this episode, Scott Harden joined us for the final part in a special 3-part series. This final part of our conversation takes the major points from the previous 2 episodes and applies them specifically to authoring NuGet packages. We start by discussing what NuGet packages are, cover the NuGet Package Explorer, which you can run in your browser, by the way, and finally wrap everything up by taking a look at a PR that Scott had provided for one of Jamie's open source packages, owaspheders.core.
So in this case, it's like, well, okay, what icon do we use? A lot of developers are like, I'm a programmer, I'm not a graphic designer, but I just want to encourage everyone, it doesn't matter. First of all, no one's downloading your NuGet package because you're a graphic designer. Okay, some of the most popular NuGet packages have really simple icons, and I'm not going to call any by name, but it's kind of a joke where a lot of people make a really simple one-off icon when their project gets small, and then they kind of feel like they can never change it later because their project got big. So you have a lot of really great projects with really simple icons, so don't be intimidated by that.
Anyway, without further ado, let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and we'll dive into the core of modern .NET. My voice was created using generative AI. Before we start, please could you introduce yourself, Scott?
Sure, yeah, my name is Scott Harden, and I currently work as a neuroscientist. And if you look at my resume, it is really confusing because there's a lot of stuff in there. I'll walk through it in a minute. But the core thread is that for a really long time, I've written software that just solves problems, gets stuff done, and I've shared it on the internet. So I'm a little bit older, I'm in my 30s, and I have kept a website and a blog ever since I was really young, like a teenager. And back then, I was really interested in programming. Back then, it was doing stuff that teenagers do, making chat bots and stuff like that. But as I started to enter the workforce and study kind of complex topics, I started to use programming as a way to solve problems and innovate. And I got really captivated by the biotech space. So I went to graduate school studying molecular biology and microbiology, which is like DNA and genetic engineering and that type of thing. In the early 2000s, that was like really special. Bioinformatics was really taking off. And it's kind of the intersection of biology and computer science where some problems and some data sets are just so complicated, you have to write software to analyze it. And that core idea just inspired me so much. The idea that if you can figure out a way to use software to measure something that's never been measured before, all of a sudden, everything you look at becomes a novel discovery. It was just really cool. So I studied molecular biology, and at that time, GitHub wasn't a thing in the early 2000s. Blogs is really where it was at for people sharing code and inspiring others with the code they write. So people would solve challenging problems, and they would write about their solutions on their blog or on a website, and people would read websites, get inspired, make their own code, and share it the similar way. So I kind of cut my teeth in open source back then, just sharing code online and being interested in what other people are doing. And then I got a little bit distracted career-wise. I ended up going to dental school for a combination of like complicated reasons. And dental school was interesting. It was really cool. Like I am a dentist now. I'm technically a dentist. But when I was in dental school, about halfway through, I realized like this is cool. I get to do, work with patients, do dentistry, very technical in some senses. But I really was missing that computer programming aspect that I loved so much from my childhood and even in molecular biology, bioinformatics. And so I started thinking like, well, what's my future going to be? Like this dental thing is cool, but I miss the programming so much. And I tried to figure out how I could strategize my way into a career that was a little bit better fit and let me use some of those technical interests. So I learned a phrase a few weeks ago called career crafting or job crafting. And now in hindsight, I realized like, oh, that's such a great word. It's like you have this job you want to do, but you have the job you have now. And it's like, how do I transform where I am now so that I can do the thing I want to do with the environment I'm in now? And for some people, that looks like maybe they're in, QA, and maybe they're writing some code to solve some problems or whatever. But for me, that ended up being a complicated journey that ended up in me getting a PhD in another subject while in dental school. So I was studying dentistry, but I also studied to get a PhD in neuroscience. And the reason I was interested in neuroscience is because at that time I was really into electrical engineering and computer programming, kind of at the intersection of hardware and software, signal analysis especially. I was really into like radio frequency engineering. And there was this program that would let me get a PhD, and even as a dental student. And the intent was, well, you'll get a PhD in oral biology or something that kind of makes sense for a dentist. But I kind of read the fine print and I realized I can get a PhD in anything as long as it's in the College of Medicine. And then I learned about this field called cellular neurophysiology, which is an entire branch of science dedicated to studying electrical signals from neurons. And involved with that is a lot of complex hardware, tech, gear. You write a lot of software to do signal analysis. It ended up being this really cool way for me to kind of exercise my passion for computer programming and the technical side of science, but still be in kind of like this biology environment. So long story short, I ended up getting both those degrees. I graduated dental school the same day I got my PhD in neuroscience. It was a crazy journey. I don't know if I would do that again. But there's this day too where I decided like, hey, I could be a dentist or I could work with technology in this biotech space. I could try doing 50-50, but that means I'd always be sacrificing one to do the other. What do I really want to do? And I just leaned in to the biotech 100%. I remember there's this day, the very last day I practiced dentistry, there was this girl, she was super nice. I did a root canal and she left and she didn't know, but she was my last patient. And I knew at that time, like, okay, from now on, I'm going all in on this tech stuff. So maybe that was 6 or 8 years ago. And I've been working kind of in that space ever since. And at work, I use tech to solve cool problems that touch programming, but it doesn't necessarily satisfy all the technical interests, especially software architecture, just software development in general. So I get a lot of that out in my free time as an open source contributor and open source maintainer. All right, well, hey, we have a little bit of time left. I'd love to switch gears a little bit and narrow in on some more .NET specific stuff. We've kind of talked about just .NET culture in general, but I'd love to go a little bit deeper into specifically NuGet packaging and how to share some of that code that you've written when you get to the point you're writing code and ready to share it with others. So, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the ideas that I brought for the show?
Yeah, sure. So like we've got a whole list of things, but like let's talk about I know we've got the PR that you've raised, very kindly raised for one of my packages that is a NuGet package that you can download. But I think it might be worth just really quickly talking about what a NuGet package is, because from my, like anyone could just download a NuGet package. And if you right click and open with WinZip or 7-zip or whatever, you'll find out it's just a zip file. It's way more complicated than that, but it's kind of just a zip file, right? And it just, because like some of my first .NET framework apps was before NuGet was a thing, right? You just downloaded random DLLs and threw them in the directory with your binaries, and everything just worked, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'd love to have this conversation, just bringing in everyone. Maybe someone has very little or no experience with NuGet, or maybe they're very early in their software development journey. Let's actually just kind of call out here what I assume we're both thinking. Why would you generally advise people not to download DLLs off the internet and just copy them to their computer?
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's a really good question. It is definitely to do with security, right? If you don't know about where this stuff is coming from, then there is no way that you can actually ensure that the code you are randomly adding into your application actually runs, right? There's no visibility. All you're doing is downloading a pre-compiled binary. It's just a random stream of ones and zeros, and you're saying, yeah, cool, there is some code in here, but I have no idea what it is. So there's no governance, there's no attestations, there's no provenance, there's none of this. It's just, we promise that there is some code here, and we promise that it's not going to do anything nasty.
Yeah, so it's very much not advised to download DLLs off the internet and to put them on your computer. It's essentially like downloading an exe file, which I think more people would know, like, hey, that's a very big security concern. But when you download a DLL, it's pretty much the same thing. You're downloading code that who knows who wrote that could be executed on your system. So what you said is interesting. What you said a few minutes ago is interesting. We kind of mentally treat NuGet packages differently. But if you go to NuGet and you look up your favorite package and download it, the extension is .nupkg. If you just rename it to .zip, you'll see it's just a zip file, and you can extract it. And inside the zip file is DLLs. And it's like, well, wait a minute. There is almost no difference between downloading a raw DLL from the internet or downloading a zipped DLL from NuGet. Mm-hmm. They are both just downloading DLLs from the internet. And a lot of people, myself included, initially thought that, well, the NuGet packages just contain source code or even .NET DLLs, and that's not even necessarily true. They typically contain .NET DLLs, but you can include a third-party DLL in a NuGet package. One of my NuGet packages does it. I distribute a package that uses a third-party DLL that the source is not available for. It's a binary from a reputable company, presumably written in C++, but I don't have the source code for it. I just have a header file, and I distribute it with my NuGet package. And the day that I realized you can just put arbitrary DLLs in NuGet packages, that's when it really clicked for me that, wow, like security is a thing. You can't just be installing random NuGet packages. This is really important to get right. So some of the things we're going to talk about today are some things that you can do to kind of secure up your own package and make it a little bit easier to signal that you are who you say you are and the package contains what it should contain. So, okay, we talked about a NuGet package, kind of what it is. Most people get their start with NuGet packages, probably consuming them in Visual Studio, or maybe in the console they're using .NET add package. But when you install a package, it gets downloaded from NuGet as that .nupkg file, and that's how it's distributed. But let's say that someone's kind of early on their software development journey and they want to make one of their own packages. The way to do it is actually pretty easy. Most people are used to using Visual Studio or the command line. And in Visual Studio, you can build a project, but there's also a button you can click to pack a project. And on the command line, you can do .NET Build to build it or .NET Pack to create your own NuGet package. And when you do either of those, your source code gets built. And if you have different platform targets, it'll actually make different DLLs and just package them all together and make a NuGet package, and it'll drop it in your bin folder that's just ready to use. And you can consume it locally. And for testing purposes, it's worth knowing how to install NuGet packages from your own local computer. You can search that on the internet to learn how to do that. Or you can make an account at NuGet, and you can just drag and drop that NuGet package into the browser and upload it right from the website, and now anyone can install that NuGet package. So I just wanted to point out, if someone knows a little bit of C#, but they've never made a NuGet package, it's actually pretty straightforward to get started. And in a lot of cases, I find it much easier to consume code from a NuGet package. I find that easier than downloading someone's repository and copying the source code to my computer. So it's definitely something I'd recommend people explore if they haven't done it before.
Definitely. And for those who don't know, if you've been doing anything with, say, ASP.NET Core, you've been using NuGet packages. One of the primary benefits of the new architecture for .NET versus the architecture for .NET Framework is that lots of things were split off into their own little NuGet packages. Little is the wrong word, I'm sorry. Little as in scale of functionality, not scale of effort required to create them. And so what you'll find is most of the common namespaces in C# and .NET, rather in .NET, because I've confused everything by saying that, but let's just ignore what I said there. A lot of the smaller namespaces in .NET have been packaged up as their own packages, and ASP.NET Core is a pack. Well, it isn't a pack. I'm getting really pedantic now. I'm sorry, everyone. It's not a package. It is a meta package. So it is a package of packages. And so you've been using NuGet perhaps without even realizing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are a lot of features about NuGet packages. So now we're leaning in to get a little bit more advanced here. There's some features that a lot of people might not be aware of, but if you make NuGet packages, it's to your benefit to learn that these features exist and to figure out how to implement them in your own projects. So these are some of the topics that I put in the pull request that I put on one of Jamie's NuGet packages, and we're going to kind of talk through that. But before we jump there, I just wanted to point out that the NuGet website has a really useful column on the right side of the page. If you go to any NuGet package page on NuGet.org, on the right side, it lets you download the package, but it also has a few other pieces of information. It might link to the source repository, it might link to the license, and there is a button right now that says Open in NuGet Package Explorer. Jamie, have you ever used this on the website?
I have not. I have not. In fact, I'm actually going to open it now for one of my packages. We'll do it live, right?
Okay.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah, just for the listeners, which package are we going to look at?
Oh, yeah. So I'm looking at my OWASP core package. It's loaded a bunch of WASM, so WebAssembly. Oh my goodness, it's Uno platform. That is awesome. Yeah. So it's running .NET in my browser. That's awesome.
So yeah, this is really cool. This is a fancy file browser that lets you view the contents of that zip folder that makes the NuGet package. So you can actually poke through the package, and we'll go in a little detail in a minute. But although this web app is absolutely fantastic, I do want to point out that there's a companion desktop app. It doesn't come with Visual Studio right now. You just have to install it manually. I think it's a .NET tool. I'm sure you can find it. It's the NuGet Package Explorer for the desktop. But the advantage of having it on your computer is you can open these files locally, and it makes it really convenient to poke through and make sure they're built correctly. And you can also edit the fields, which is just really, really convenient. So yeah. So let's poke through here. I want to mention a couple of the things. There are a lot of features in here. We're not going to go through all of them, but I will point out that before you install a NuGet package, if you're really security conscious, you can kind of pop open these folders and get an idea of what's going to be copied to your system just from this package. Now, this doesn't show you the contents of all of the dependency packages. That's kind of its own thing. But this lets you really quickly just poke through what's in a NuGet package. And one of the things I want to call your attention to is on the left side of the screen. And this is probably open on Jamie's website right now. There's a health section. And on Jamie's page, it has some red X's.
Yeah.
So,
oh my goodness, I'm terrible at contributing towards open source.
No, it's okay. So a lot of these features are new features that probably weren't there when you first made your package. But I'd like to just briefly talk through what each of these are and talk about how to fix them. So before jumping into the complexity of those red X's, let's just take a little step back and talk about how to edit what appears in a NuGet package, because it might be a little bit confusing for someone who's brand new. You type .NET pack and a new package file comes up. Where does it get all of its information? And the answer is, or at least the modern answer, because this changes sometimes between .NET Framework and .NET Core, but the modern .NET answer for where it gets its information is the CS_proj file. So your modern project will have a CS_proj file, and if you define certain elements in there, they will automatically be consumed when it builds the NuGet package. And I'd highly recommend, there's a website that's sort of like the modern best practices for building NuGet packages. A lot of my suggestions today are going to come from that, but you can just kind of step through that website item by item and make sure that your CS_proj has all those things. But we're going to talk about the big ones today. So let's dive right in. So I can tell from the package explorer on this package that you have bundled a license file with your package. Mm-hmm. And the root directory of the package is license.txt. And I can see from line 1 that it's an MIT license. Now, I'm not going to read every word, and I'm not going to use a file differ, but I've got to kind of assume that this is an MIT license. And without actually reading it word for word, I can't really know. And it makes sense if you have a custom license to include your license.txt in your package. But the modern best practice, if you're going to use a standard license, you can use what's called a license expression. So if you edit your CS_proj file, I think originally you had a license file. You can remove that, and you can add an element that's package license expression. And most people will just need to add, MIT or GPL or Apache 2. You can just add those few words there. And I think licenses.nuget.org has a list of what's available, but all the common ones are available, and you can just stick your license right there. And then the advantage, if you do that, is that when you go to the package website on NuGet, instead of saying click here for the license file, it'll actually say MIT license. So you don't have to do a bunch of reading and try to figure out what license it is. It just, immediately what it is. The license expression. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just real quick, to your point there, Scott, I could include a file that is license.txt and it looks like it's the MIT license. But actually, there could be, like you said, you're not going to get a diff out and actually check it. There could be something in there that is like, disregard everything that we've said above. This is now actually a Jamie 2024 license that says that if you install this, you owe me $500,000.
Yes. Yes. So that is the a concern that is just totally eliminated if you use license expression. So I'm not going to go into it here, but I will say that the license expression, although most people just put a single word in there, it's actually a little language. It's called an SPDX format. There's this whole specification. It's almost like a SQL statement. You can have ands and ors and parentheses. So you can have like MIT and then the whole thing in parentheses, LGPL or BSD3. Right. So let's get it's complicated. But I just wanted to say that, hey, you can switch to a license expression, and that'll be an improvement for modern packages. Right. So the next thing I wanted to point out is one that you've already done, which is fantastic to see. But a lot of older projects don't have this, and it seems so simple now because we kind of take it for granted. But that's to add a README, and this README file is not meant to be consumed in a text editor, but rather it's the content of the web page that will be displayed to the user when they go to your packages page on NuGet. So when we go to your packages page on NuGet, we see the information about it. Here's a quick start. Here's some code. All of that is fantastic. And back in the day, that didn't exist. You'd go to someone's NuGet package page. It would just be blank. You'd have a name, and that's it. Maybe if you were lucky, you'd have the link to their website, and you'd have to read their website to figure out what the project did. So, so people can search the internet for how to add this package README file, but there's a package README file element that you include in your CS project file, and you also have to add a line that tells NuGet to bundle that text file with the package. So so you've already got that checkbox marked with the README, so you're doing well there.
Okay, 1-0.
Yeah, you're doing it so far. Okay, so the next pair I kind of think of together, I highly recommend doing. And they are two elements that you can add to your CS project file. One of them is package project URL, and the other one is repository URL. So both of these help connect the person who made the NuGet package with where the consumer can learn more about it. Because if I just go to your, currently, because right now your package doesn't have these, if I just go to your NuGet page, it's not actually trivial for me to figure out where the source code lives. Luckily, you have a README. If you didn't have a README, I would have nothing. But you have a README, and halfway down the page, there's a link to your GitHub project. And that's how I can figure out, this is where the source code lives. On the other hand, if you just added that repository URL, then the source code would have a link on the right head of the page right next to where the license info is, and you could just go straight to the source code. The package project URL is good if you have a website which is separate from the source code. So in my case, for Scottplot, for example, my repository URL goes to github/Scottplot, but the package project goes to scottplot.net, where you can get the documentation and all that type of thing. So those are two more things I recommend adding. So let's talk about the 3 red X's now that showed up on yours, and they're going to be a little bit less fun, and then we'll come back at the very end and we'll talk about the fun one. So, the 3 red X's. And it's sort of like if you fill out all 3, you get a bonus. These all 3 kind of work together to do some magical stuff. So the gist is that by having these checked, it slightly enhances the credibility and security of your package, but it also makes it much easier for your consumers to use debugging tools as they're using your package. So the first one is to create debug symbols. So some people might be familiar with debug symbols. They kind of give more information about pieces of the code, especially like function signatures and that type of thing. So if part of the code blows up, the user has a little bit more useful information that might help the original maintainer figure out how to debug this thing. So enabling or including debug symbols, there's an element include debug symbols, and also in symbol package format. We're not going to talk about the nuance of those, but we can just include them and make the format SNUPKG. If you add those two lines to your CH project file, then every time you build your NuGet project, you won't just get a .NUPKG, you'll also get a .SNUPKG. And if you publish your projects to NuGet using the console or using the command line, they automatically send the symbols to NuGet. If you're using the browser, you have to manually upload the symbols, but if the symbols are there, then they'll show up on the right side of the page on your website or on the NuGet website. But the cool thing about having the symbols there is if you use an IDE like Visual Studio and you're consuming someone's NuGet package and some function blows up, it gives you more useful debug information about exactly where the issue is. And the really, really cool thing is that if you connected your project with a Git repository, it's smart enough to kind of wire that together. And it says, well, okay, I know the file that blew up and I know the function name or the function information, and I have the URL for the Git repository. IDEs like Visual Studio are actually smart enough to let you jump right into the source code. This also works for F12. So in Visual Studio, you can use F12 to jump inside of a function. It is the coolest thing ever that now we can, if we enable this right combination of things, we can enable a feature called source link that when you press F12, it lets you jump not just into the functions of your own code, but you can jump into the source code of a NuGet project that you're using. It is so helpful because half the time, if I need to do this, half the time I'm just calling a function wrong because I'm misunderstanding what the function's actually doing. And by looking at the source code, I can figure it out. And the other half, maybe the function was written wrong and it's a project that I maintain. Now my users, just with the F12, can immediately see where it's blowing up. And if it's something wrong with my code, they can very quickly create a pull request that lets them fix it without having to download all the source code and do all the debugging on their end. So if you enable all these check marks, it's sort of like the win that you get is source link, and it makes it really easy for consumers to jump through your source code in their IDE. So it's pretty cool.
And that's all from that, what did we say? It was the SNUPKG file, right? That's just taking those debug symbols, packaging them up, and then allowing the debugger at the other end on the consumer end to actually do that for us, right?
I'll say yes, but with a star. The star is that we also have to enable the next thing, which it's called deterministic builds and continuous integration builds. We'll talk about that in a second. So you have to have kind of the magic combination of elements in here. And also you have to be on a modern .NET platform. So starting with .NET 8, I think these source link features just automatically become available if you have the right elements in your CS project file. But if you have an older project, you can still use all these features. Even if you're on .NET Framework, you just have to install the source link NuGet package. And it truly is as easy as just installing the sourcelink.github or whatever it is NuGet package, and the installation process kind of wires it up for you. And I know this because I have packages in production that use SourceLink and multi-target builds for .NET Framework and .NET 6 and .NET 8. So it is getting easier in the future, but just because it's easier for new projects doesn't mean it's not possible for old projects. My understanding is right now this works across the board. So this is a really neat feature to enable in your projects.
The following is a paid advertisement. Welcome back, .NET enthusiasts. This is another episode of the Modern .NET Show, and today we have a unique collaboration with industry expert Jamie Taylor. Known for his insights on our show over the past 7 years, he now brings those expertise to your doorstep as an external contractor at RJJ Software in both B2B and C2C engagements. Jamie has been instrumental in helping businesses across the UK harness their digital potential through custom software development tailored to their specific needs. For our US-based clients, he's facilitated transformational change by integrating cutting-edge AI technologies into their systems, all while maintaining his stellar reputation as a thought leader in the field of .NET and software consultancy. Whether your company is looking to elevate its UK operations or reshape its US strategy, Jamie can provide tailored solutions that exceed expectations. Reach out through RJJ Software today and let's unlock your business's digital potential. The audio for this advertisement was created with AI.
Nice. Because I do know that, because I use Rider a lot, I do know that Rider can kind of do this a little. Like if you have 12 on something that is not your code that is included in some kind of NuGet package, it can try and do the same thing. It does a whole bunch of stuff where it downloads the NuGet package from source and tries to figure out where you are and what you're doing. So I'm thinking that behind the scenes, they're probably doing something similar to this. They're trying to get that information for you. I don't know whether that's how that works or not. I just know that is a thing. But it's really cool that there is a way to do it for non-Rider users, right? For people who are using Visual Studio, because I am very much a case of similar to I think it's Scott Hanselman who says, use what you like, use what works for you, use what makes you happy. So some people want to write .NET with Rider, some people want to write .NET with Visual Studio, some people want to use Visual Studio Code. I know at least one person who's using NeoVim, and that's all totally cool. Whatever works for you. You can totally do programming the hard mode. That's totally fine. But like, I love this ability to be able to take a NuGet package that I'm consuming and hit F12 and be able to actually dive in and say, oh, right, no, I get it. Yep, I'm doing this wrong because I've made this misunderstanding. I get it now. And then you can fix your own code, right?
Yeah, and I assume by the time this episode airs, these things will be fixed and we can see this in your package. But in the meantime, I'm just looking at one of the Scotplot packages. But in the NuGet Package Explorer, on the left side of the screen where it shows all the information, if you have SourceLink connected, it'll show you your repository URL and the git commit hash. And my understanding is that's how it kind of just wires everything together. Because if you know from the debug symbols where the code is, and you know from the git URL and the hash, you can kind of wire everything together behind the scenes.
Right. So that's cool. Really cool. Yeah.
So that last magic element you need is if you're on a modern .NET platform, well, actually, in all platforms, you need something called a continuous integration build, and you need to be set to true. And all it does is it forces your CS_proj file to not contain absolute file paths. It forces everything to be relative file paths to make sure that your build could happen purely from the source code repository. So if you set that to true, that's one of the requirements. Older .NET projects also need the deterministic element to be set to true. Older .NET projects, if you recompile multiple times, the DLL will have a slightly different hash. Well, I guess a very different hash, but the DLL will be slightly different enough to totally change the hash. And you have to enable the deterministic build for it to be bit for bit the exact same binary every time. So that's the last kind of magical piece of this puzzle that lets this work.
Nice. And that's like, I mean, we'll get onto it in a moment because you've very graciously provided a PR that pulls all of this stuff in. I mean, what you've said is add a couple of things to the CS_proj file and magic happens and it does it all for you, right? Is that literally what you've done? Like, because I still have...
It's that easy, yeah.
Right. So for listeners, I still, whether you believe me or not, I haven't opened the PR yet. I don't know if this is what Scott could have wiped out all the code. I don't know, but I'm sure that you have.
You can look at the PR if you want. The whole thing is, maybe 10 lines of changed code and one more feature that we haven't talked about yet. But the only code up change is the CS_proj file. That's all I'm doing, and you'll get all these new features, presumably right. just by merging it in.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll have a look at that in a moment. But yeah, let's talk about this other feature that you want to talk about.
Okay. So we will close on this one, and this is, I won't say it's a best practice, but I would say do it because it's fun and it's an opportunity to do something that is more than code, and that's just pick an icon. Like, pick an icon and apply it to your project. Because when you search for, in your case, OWASP, I'm sure there are a million OWASP things. And if you know exactly what you're looking for, it is so convenient to just immediately have that brand recognition, or I recognize this author, or I recognize this person or this package. And the logo, if you add an icon file, It's pretty easy to do. You just add it's 2 lines that you add to your CS project file, one to include the icon file. It's just a PNG file. I think it's 128 by 128. And another line just to say that, hey, use this icon, this package icon. That's all it takes to add an icon. And it's not just visible on the NuGet page, it's visible from within your IDE. So if you use Visual Studio and manage packages, you'll be able to see your icon there. And they support transparency too. So if you have the opportunity to add an icon, go for it. So in this case, it's like, well, okay, what icon do we use? A lot of developers are like, I'm a programmer, I'm not a graphic designer. But I just want to encourage everyone, it doesn't matter. First of all, no one's downloading your NuGet package because you're a graphic designer. Okay, some of the most popular NuGet packages have really, really, really simple icons. And I'm not going to call any by name, but it's kind of a joke where a lot of people make a really simple one-off icon when their project gets small, and then they kind of feel like they can never change it later because their project got big. So you have a lot of really great projects with really simple icons. So don't be intimidated by that. The other thing is this pull request, I just went ahead and made an icon for you. We can change it. I'm not going to commit you, Jamie, to using this icon. Right. But I'll talk through the process that I used to make it just because I thought it was kind of interesting. And hopefully it'll kind of lower the intimidation factor for some people who might be listening who don't consider themselves graphic designers. So what I did was, and again, I don't know that much about your package. Personally, I don't do a lot of API.NET stuff. I do some, but I have not used your package before. So rather than do a deep dive trying to figure out the details, I just took your README and I gave it to ChatGPT, and I said, generate an icon for this NuGet package. Right. And I gave it the one-liner. And it gave me a logo. And what's funny is I post these on the pull request too, so you can kind of see my thought process. It gave me a logo that kind of looked like a shield in a browser window. And it's like, okay, that's cool. But I said, like, oh, make it simpler. And it gave me a simpler version. And the gist is like, oh, I kind of like this idea. It's a shield, which conveys security. And there's like a browser window, which communicates HTTP. But then I had this letter H, and where kind of like a logo would be. So I thought about it, and I looked at the official OWASP logo, and it's a WASP, but also legally I looked at their licensing. You're not supposed to use it unless you're official and all this stuff. So it's like, okay, I want a WASP, but I don't want their WASP. So I just went on Google image search and found some WASPs, and I found 2 versions of WASPs I liked. So I used Inkscape just to make like a line drawing that was kind of a hybrid between these 2 designs. And then I got that WASP and I just stuck it inside the shield. So the whole thing only took a few minutes. I made a logo. It's fine. Like, it's probably not going to win any awards, but it is so much better than no logo in many cases. And so I made it as an SVG, so it scales to any size. I exported it as a 128 by 128 PNG, and I just edited the CS project file to say, hey, include this icon in the package, and now it'll show up in your package listing whenever you use it on NuGet.
If you're enjoying this show, would you mind sharing it with a friend or colleague? Check out Podcatcher for a link to the show notes, which has an embedded player within it and a transcription and all that stuff, and share that link with them. I'd really appreciate it if you could indeed share the show. But if you'd like a few other ways to support it, you could leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. So if you head over to .netcore.show/review, you'll find loads of ways to do that. You could consider buying the show a coffee. The Buy Me a Coffee link is available on each show's show notes page on the website. This is a one-off financial support option. You could become a patron. This is a monthly subscription-based financial support option, and the link to that is included on each episode show notes page as well. I'd love it if you could share the show with a friend or colleague, or leave a rating or review. The other options are completely up to you and are not required at all to continue enjoying the show. Anyway, let's get back to it. Nice.
That's
let's
the look.
Take a look then. So I'm going to take.
Oh, you haven't seen it yet? Okay.
Not seen it yet. I'm gonna have a look. So yeah, I can see where. Yeah. So I will leave the PR will always be there because that's how PRs work. Like you said, it will likely be closed and merged way before this comes out. But I can see the process. Oh yeah. I can see the. Oh, okay, right. Scott, I gotta say, this is a fantastic logo.
Right,
this
it's actually really good.
Yeah, right.
It communicates, it's so simple. It communicates the things. It communicates security, browser, and the WASP. And
Yep, I love it.
so, and I'm not here saying I'm some great designer. I'm just trying to encourage the listeners, hey, if you feel like you're a programmer more than a designer, it's okay. You can put something together that passes the bar. And if your project gets $1 million in the future, maybe you can hire a professional designer to make it nicer. But don't be intimidated by what it takes to make a logo.
Or you can hire Scott to do one for you.
or that. And actually, okay, on that note, I will say the things that we talked about, just improving people's NuGet packages, adding a link to their Git repo, adding a link to their website, adding an icon, none of these contributions are hard. And I bet so many maintainers with older projects would love to have a user contribute these improvements for them. So if someone's a little bit newer to open source, doesn't really know how to get started, maybe they're intimidated by the actual code, a lot of these improvements can be made by people who are just getting their feet wet contributing to open source. And also, it's October. We're in the thick of Hacktoberfest. I know some people are into that. These type of code contributions are just unique, and I bet a lot of maintainers would really benefit from having pull requests like this show up in their inbox. And even if they don't merge it, even if they don't like the logo exactly, it can start a conversation that can lead to possibly something that might be a better fit for the project. But yeah, either way, this isn't just for maintainers. Contributors can do this stuff too. So yeah, I'm glad you like it.
Nice. Yeah, it's awesome. I have to say, Scott, this is awesome. I love the logo that you've created. I love the reading through PRs. It's often quite non-trivial to write a good PR. These are the changes I've made. This is why. This is that kind of thing. But reading through your PR, it's really clear what you're doing and what you're suggesting and the changes that you've made and the rationale for why. And like I said, I really appreciate the inclusion of how did we make the icon, and obviously talking through it on the recording as well, because then for people who maybe come along, it could be that at some point in the future someone creates a logo that looks similar to this, and then they try and get me in trouble for using a logo which looks similar to this, but actually I can then point to this PR and say, actually, I'm taking it on good faith that Scott created this using the process that he wrote in this PR, and so therefore it existed before this copyright claim came about. There's my proof, right?
Yeah. And in fairness, that's why I think it's really useful just to have some kind of basic skills using some type of vector graphics editor. A lot of people use Illustrator. I use Inkscape. Inkscape is totally free. It takes a little time to learn how to use it, but once you know how to use it, it's such a great tool. Because in this case, both of my kind of inspiration images were free to use for personal use, but not for corporate use without attribution. And it gets prickly if you can use a picture, but you have to include files. On the other hand, if you can kind of get inspired by what you find on the internet and then just sling your own design using free tools that you have, and then you just own the rights to it, it's a really liberating feeling. So it's a great tool to have. But yeah, I'm glad you like it.
Awesome. Yeah. I'll put a link in the show notes, folks, for you to come and check this PR out. It's PR number 96. Also, how did I get to 96 pull requests? I tell you how.
1 million users. That's how you do it.
Well, specifically, this is because I work with pull requests. So, personal opinion, if I'm even if it's one of my own repos, even for the repos for the website for this show, hey folks, this show is built from source. The website for it is built from I'm not going to tell you what, but it is built from source. I create a pull request for each episode and then merge the pull request in. So, I end up with, at this point, wastheaders.co on October 19th as 96 pull requests because that's how I work. But that's just how I work. Everybody works differently. No, that's really cool.
Yeah. Well, hey, Jamie, cool. I've really enjoyed the discussion. We've had a long one here. We covered a lot of ground. But
we really did.
But yeah, I'm happy we got to have this chat today, and hopefully you learned some stuff. I know I learned some stuff by putting this together, and hopefully the listeners learned some stuff along the way as well.
Oh, absolutely. I certainly have learned a whole bunch of stuff, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, Scott. It always is. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you coming on the show. I'm going to give you as much time as you'd like to sort of do some, people sometimes call them like selfish or whatever shout outs. But yeah, tell the folks how to get in touch with you, or how to learn more about you, or about Scotplot and things like that, right? Because I know that you've kind of mentioned it a few times, but we didn't really get a chance to talk about it. I'd love to, and I'm doing this in the recording, folks, this will not be edited out. If you're interested, Scott, I'd love to talk in the future about Scotplot, but we could totally cut this. I know I just said I'm not going to cut it, but we could totally cut this if you want.
All right, you put me on the spot now. No, I would love to talk about Scotplot. That has been a fantastic journey. I've learned a lot along the way and have some cool stories. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk about Scotplot in the future. So yeah, the closing us out here, thank you for being here. By the way, if you enjoy the show, buy Jamie a coffee. My name is Scott Harden, and my personal website is swharden.com. If you search the internet, you can find me pretty easily. For anyone who is interested in the medical stuff, my About page has a section at the bottom. It's kind of hidden these days, but you can actually follow my medical situation. So you can see what stuff was like in the past, and if things ever change in the future, that's where I'm going to share updates. So that's been pretty interesting. I'm easy to find on GitHub and actually LinkedIn. So I mentioned on the last episode, and again, if people haven't listened to that last episode, but they kind of like the discussion here, there's a lot more of it in the previous one. I'd recommend listening to it. But like I said on the last episode, if people have had career changes, so I guess we didn't talk about it in this episode, but I am not a full-time software developer. I'm a dentist, and right now I work as a neuroscientist in a research laboratory. So, but if there are other people who have had kind of interesting journeys that led them into software development, I would love to connect and learn more about their stories, and vice versa. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect with me, and just mention that you heard me on the show. I would love to hear more about your story and meet other people who've had interesting career paths as well. But yeah, and then Scotplot, you can find more, just scotplot.net. And there's a Discord, you can find it from the website. It's a pretty interesting community got going on over there. So, but yeah, altogether, Jamie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
It has been a pleasure, absolutely, Scott. And I'm always so appreciative getting to spend time chatting with you, because you are a super interesting guy, I have to say, and it's always really loads of fun just talking to you, because like I always, no matter what we talk about, I walk away going, I learned a whole bunch of stuff there.
Well, that's a sign of a great conversation. So I'm glad we got to share it today. For sure.
Yeah, thank you ever so much. Just sidebar, one of the notes that I have from a conversation we had before was I talked to you about color space, and I also talked to you slightly before this call about color space, and then embarrassed myself because I didn't know something about you. So relating to color. I
am very, okay. Yeah, I actually, if you Google, I don't know what the exact phrase is, you'll find someone wrote in Nature, an article that published in Nature, which is kind of a prestigious scientific journal. I'm not an author, I was just quoted in there. But it's about the use of color in scientific figures and in data visualization. And the reason I am so passionate about this topic is because I am colorblind. I have a really hard time distinguishing reds from blacks and greens. So it's the topic of color and data visualization is really close to my heart. So I'll close with that.
There we go. Excellent. Thank you ever so much, Scott. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. It's been a great time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Modern.net Show with me, Jamie Taylor. I'd like to thank this episode's guest for graciously sharing their time, expertise, and knowledge with us. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at the podcast's website, and there'll be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/review for ways to do that. Reach out via our contact page at .netcore.show/contact, or join our Discord server at .netcore.show/discord, all of which are linked in the show notes. But above all, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I hope that I'll see you again next time for some more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks.